Let me be honest with you about something. I've been covering this league for a long time, and I've watched a lot of franchise meltdowns in real time. I've seen the signs. I've heard the coded language from front offices. I've watched great players quietly distance themselves from organizations that slowly stopped deserving them. And what I'm watching unfold in Cleveland right now, today, this week, this very moment, hits different from all of those. Because this one isn't chaotic. It isn't loud or explosive or driven by ego. It's something quieter and in many ways more devastating. It's a man of extraordinary discipline and extraordinary patience finally deciding, calmly and deliberately, that he's done waiting for an organization to become what it promised him it would be, and I think that quiet is exactly what should scare Cleveland fans the most. Myles Garrett, and I want you to really think about who this man is before we go any further, is not a guy who reacts. He's not someone who fires off statements in the heat of frustration or lets a bad week turn into a public confrontation. He sculpts, he reads poetry. He processes the world with a depth and an intentionality that frankly most professional athletes never develop, and that most professional athletes would never be comfortable showing publicly even if they had it. When Garrett speaks, he has already thought 3 moves ahead. When he says something in front of a camera, it is because he decided, deliberately, carefully, with full awareness of the consequences, that it needed to be said. So when he sat across from Rich Eisen and told the world in the calmest possible voice that the direction of the Cleveland Browns no longer aligned with what he came there to accomplish, that was not frustration. That was not a bad day. That was a conclusion. A reasoned, considered final stage conclusion, and the fact that it came out sounding so composed should make everybody in that building significantly more concerned than if he had screamed it. Here's the image I keep coming back to, the one that I think frames this whole situation more clearly than any press conference statement or front office carefully worded denial. Voluntary workouts, the Browns facility. Shedeur Sanders is inside. Early, engaged, microphone clipped to his jersey because the organization wanted to capture content from his session. Smiling, competing, working through the kind of morning reps that only the truly committed show up for when nobody is obligating them to be there. And Myles Garrett, the greatest defensive player in professional football, the man who just broke the NFL's all-time single-season sack record in the most dominant individual defensive performance this league has seen in a generation, is not in the building, not injured. Not managing something personal and private? He made a choice, a deliberate, unmistakable, eyes-wide-open choice to be somewhere else while that facility ran without him. Put those 2 images next to each other and tell me that's a coincidence. It isn't. It's communication. 2 different kinds of communication from 2 very different places, and the people running the Cleveland Browns organization understand exactly what both of them mean. I want to spend real time on Garrett's situation because I think the national conversation has been frustratingly surface level about it, and this man deserves to have his perspective contextualized properly, because when you trace the actual sequence of events that led him here, what you find is not a star player throwing a tantrum over contract stuff or playing time or attention. What you find is a person who gave 8 years of elite, borderline supernatural production to an organization that has repeatedly, consistently, and in some cases almost defiantly made decisions that undercut the foundation of what he was promised when he restructured his deal and committed his peak years to staying in Cleveland. And I'm not trafficking in rumors when I say that. The evidence is documented and public. Start with Jim Schwartz. If you don't know that name, let me tell you why it matters, because it's the thread that runs through all of this. Schwartz built the Cleveland defense into one of the most dominant units in recent franchise history. He had relationships with those players built on real trust, on mutual respect earned through shared work, and he had Garrett's confidence in a way that goes beyond the typical player-coordinator dynamic. When the head coaching position opened up, Garrett wasn't quietly hoping Schwartz would get the job. He was campaigning for him, openly with his name attached, with the full weight of his reputation invested in that advocacy. And then Todd Monken got the job. Now look, I'm not here to tell you Monken was a wrong hire. His offensive mind is legitimate and his work with this roster has been real and thoughtful. But for Garrett, watching his guy not get the job after publicly backing him created a wound inside his relationship with this organization that I don't think ever fully healed. Then there's the Watson situation. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Deshaun Watson specifically because the football reality of that situation has been clear to everyone paying honest attention for a long time. What I want to focus on is what that contract and the organizational decision-making it represents communicated to Garrett as a person who has invested his career in this franchise. Because Garrett watched that process unfold from inside the building. He saw the resource allocation, the contractual commitment, the institutional weight that was placed behind a decision that multiple people close to the situation have described him as watching with mounting disbelief. And when you've restructured your own deal partly on the belief that the people making decisions around you are genuinely building toward a championship, watching them sink enormous guaranteed money into a situation that the football world immediately recognized as complicated is not something you just process and move on from. It accumulates, it compounds, it adds up alongside everything else. And then there's the ownership dynamic that keeps surfacing in conversations with people who have direct knowledge of how this building operates. The pattern that gets described is consistent enough that it has to be taken seriously. The football people make their evaluations, the front office processes their recommendations, and then Jimmy Haslam arrives at decisions that don't always reflect what the people who actually understand football suggested. That gap between what the football staff knows and what the decision makers at the top are willing to commit to is the kind of organizational dysfunction that elite players are exquisitely sensitive to because they're the ones who live with the consequences of it on the field every single week. Garrett has been living with the consequences of that gap for 8 years. He called LeBron James before he went public. Let that sit for a second because I don't think that detail has received nearly enough attention. He didn't call LeBron to get permission or validation. He called him because LeBron is one of the few people on earth who knows what it actually costs, emotionally, publicly, in terms of your relationship to a city and a fan base, to reach the conclusion that the championship window you came to build doesn't exist in the place where you've been trying to build it. He was asking what the transition feels like. That is not a phone call you make when you're frustrated. That's a phone call you make when you've already done the work and you're preparing for what comes next. And then Andrew Berry walked to the podium. I watched that press conference closely and I want to explain what I heard, because NFL front office language is a specific dialect that requires translation. Berry recited Garrett's accomplishments. He acknowledged the request without confirming it in a way that could be quoted against the organization. He used the specific vocabulary of people who have been coached by legal and PR professionals to say nothing while appearing to say something. What I did not hear was conviction. I did not hear someone who had resolved a situation. I heard someone managing a situation, carefully, professionally, while buying time for something to change. And that distinction matters enormously because the window for something to change is not unlimited, and the person on the other end of that managed message has already demonstrated that he sees through it. Now let me connect this to Shedeur Sanders because this is the part of the story that I think keeps getting pulled at from the edges without anyone following the thread to where it actually leads. Garrett has been one of Shadeur's most vocal internal advocates since the moment the rookie quarterback stepped into that facility. Not in a vague, politically safe way, specifically. He has talked about the fact that Shaduer is in the coaches' offices before the coaches arrive, that he's studying film at hours when most people on the roster are still sleeping, that his preparation has a maturity and a seriousness that commands respect from everyone who sees it up close. Coming from the most respected player in that building, that kind of endorsement does something that no organizational memo or press conference statement can replicate. It tells every person in that locker room that the evaluation of who should be leading this offense has already been made by the people who are there every day and see it with their own eyes. And then think about what it means when the organization releases workout photos, 2 of Deshaun Watson, 1 of Shaduer mic'd up for content, in a context where the football evaluation has reportedly already settled. The mic'd content for Shaduer is valuable, genuinely, because it builds his brand and brings fans inside his experience. I'm not dismissing that. But miking a player up for a behind-the-scenes moment is a different organizational signal than centering him unambiguously in the practice photography as the face of this offense going forward, and documenting Watson twice in the same workout cycle, at a moment when the football staff has supposedly already reached its conclusion, sends a message, intentional or not, that the organizational commitment to that conclusion is still incomplete, still hedging. Garrett, who has spent 8 years reading the signals that NFL organizations send through their public communication choices, is apparently reading exactly what that hedging says. What Shaduer has done inside all of this noise is something I genuinely want to take a moment to acknowledge because I think it gets lost when the conversation focuses on the organizational drama swirling around him. He walked into the most complicated quarterback environment imaginable for a first-year player. Watson still on the roster. Ownership questions unresolved. A national media narrative that had already decided what it thought about him before he took a single professional snap. A fan base divided between hope and exhaustion. A building still processing the departure of the previous regime. And Shedeur Sanders responded to every single one of those pressures by doing the same thing, every single morning. showing up before everyone else, working harder than the situation required him to work, and refusing to let any of the external chaos bleed into the internal preparation. He hasn't given interviews seeking validation. He hasn't campaigned publicly for his own starting role. He's just been consistently, relentlessly, impressively present. And I'll tell you something, that quality, the ability to operate with full professional commitment inside a genuinely dysfunctional organizational environment without letting it crack your preparation, is not something you can teach. It's something you either have or you don't, and it's one of the most reliable early indicators of a quarterback who is going to survive his first NFL season rather than get consumed by it. Todd Monken's position in all of this is one I want to spend a moment on as well, because I think he's navigating one of the harder coaching situations in the league right now, and he doesn't get enough credit for how he's handling it. This is his first NFL head coaching job. His offensive vision is sound, his evaluation process has been honest, and his commitment to Shaduer, as demonstrated through rep distribution and carefully framed press conference language, has been real and consistent. But there is only so far a head coach can push his vision when the person controlling the checkbook is not fully aligned with the direction the football staff is trying to move. And what keeps getting described about Haslam's ownership pattern, the gap between what the football people recommend and what the decision maker at the top ultimately chooses, puts Monken in the impossible position of trying to build genuine organizational momentum while the ground underneath him keeps shifting in ways he can't fully control. Here's what I keep coming back to, and I want you to really sit with this because I think it's the emotional core of the entire situation. The ingredients for something real are actually present in Cleveland, not theoretically present. Genuinely, evaluably present. The offensive infrastructure has been rebuilt with real intention. The receiver room has been reconstructed thoughtfully. Shedeur's talent and preparation are not in question among the people who evaluate him every single day. Monken's system is legitimate. Garrett, at full engagement, is the most disruptive defensive force in professional football. The roster, looked at honestly and without the noise of the drama surrounding it, has real potential for the first time in a while. And that is exactly what makes the current dysfunction so painful to watch, because potential is the most fragile currency in professional sports. It doesn't wait for organizations to get their internal alignment sorted out. It exists in specific windows, with specific people at specific moments in their careers, and when those windows close because the people in charge couldn't resolve their own organizational tensions in time, they don't reopen. Mandatory minicamp is coming in June. That date matters more than any other date on the Cleveland calendar right now because it functions as a pressure test for everything that is currently unresolved. If Garrett's trade situation is still publicly unclear when that date arrives, if there's still no unambiguous organizational commitment to Shedeur as the starting quarterback, if Watson's presence is still generating the kind of deliberate ambiguity that the football staff has to navigate around rather than through, then Cleveland walks into training camp carrying a weight that will be almost impossible to shed once the real work begins. A franchise cornerstone who is publicly, specifically, calmly unhappy and wants out. A quarterback situation that remains deliberately clouded despite an internal evaluation that has apparently already produced a clear answer. An ownership dynamic that the football people have learned to predict and work around rather than trust and build from. A first-year head coach trying to establish genuine organizational identity inside a building where the external pressures keep undermining the internal momentum. The resolution to this, I want to be clear, is not structurally complex. The complexity is not in the mechanics of the decision, it's in the willingness to actually make it. What needs to happen is straightforward, and the evidence supporting it is overwhelming. The organization needs to look at what the football staff has been telling them, at what the practice field has been showing them every single morning, at what the best defensive player in football is communicating loudly enough for the entire league to hear, and make the decision that every one of those inputs is pointing directly toward. Commit to Shedeur Sanders as the starting quarterback. Not as an option, not as a competition, not as a carefully managed situation, but fully, publicly, unconditionally. Give him the platform that his preparation has already earned. And in doing so, give Myles Garrett a reason to look at the trajectory of this franchise and see something different from what he's been seeing. Because here's the thing I want to leave you with. This isn't a story about Myles Garrett wanting to leave. It's a story about a man who has given everything he has to an organization for 8 years, watched that organization make a series of decisions that systematically undermined what he was working toward, and is now simply asking, in the only language the NFL truly understands, the language of leverage and public statements and trade requests, whether the people in charge are finally ready to make decisions that match the quality of the players they've been lucky enough to build around, and if they are, if Haslam looks at the totality of what is sitting right in front of him, the franchise cornerstone, the young quarterback, the legitimate coaching vision, the window that exists right now in this moment and won't exist indefinitely, and chooses to close the gap between what the football people know and what the ownership is willing to commit to, then the trajectory of this franchise changes. The locker room unifies around a clear identity. Garrett has a reason to stay. Shaduer has the platform he's already earned. And Cleveland, for the first time in a very long time, walks into a season with genuine momentum built on something real. But if they can't do that, if the organizational alignment between the football staff and the ownership structure remains unresolved past June, if the quarterback situation stays deliberately ambiguous, if the signals the organization keeps sending keep contradicting the football reality, then we're not just talking about a bad season. We're talking about a franchise fracture of the kind that sets you back not for a year but for an era. The clock is running, the fault lines are visible, and the only question left is whether the people with the authority to act are ready to use it before the window that exists right now in Cleveland closes permanently and everyone inside that building is left explaining how something this avoidable went this wrong.